The experience of conversation is the experience of having already a good in common. In fact, several goods in common. Okay? The fact that we are in conversation makes us aware that we share already. You know, without having to create it, we share already much that is common.
Good morning, everyone. Madayaw Davao. We are having our first coffee circle conversations. Let's welcome everyone with a round of applause. With our guest, which I will be introducing in a while. In his 2018 General Faculty Assembly address, Father Joel Tabora of the Society of Jesus invited the Untitled Chapter University to take on the challenge to work together towards greater intellectual engagement for mission. In response to this challenge, the Arupi Office of Social Formation hopes to contribute to cultivating one of the 4 key activities of greater intellectual engagement for mission. That's underlined, that not just greater intellectual engagement, it's always for mission. The ability to enter genuinely into dialogue with others. This coffee circle conversations is being proposed as a concrete program of activities to facilitate this intellectual engagement for mission through dialogue. This series of video, audio, and written transcripts envision conversations that engage difficult issues and neglected questions. With this, while this platform might not aim at definitively resolving issues or conclusively answering questions, it is meant to create a space for honest dialogue without bringing others to see their way or give up their ground. Coffee Circle Conversations hopes to bring to an online platform conversations that are at the service of what Pope Francis described as the joy of truth, that expresses the restlessness of the human heart until it encounters and dwells in God's light and shares the light with all people. Hopefully, this conversation with our guest this morning will shed more light and share this light to the dim and dark parts of our self, of our society, and the world at large. Good morning, Father Pat. Welcome to this Coffee Circle Conversations. How are you?
Thank you. Good morning to you too.
Yeah. First, for the interest of everyone, I'd like to give some background of our first. You are the first guest for this Coffee Circle Conversation. So, you are, Father, you are very privileged. And we are also privileged. It's all for the greater glory of God and for mission.
Yeah.
Okay. Father Pat Jordan, or Patrick Jordan, Society of Jesus, he's not a Filipino Jesuit, as you can see. He's an Irish Jesuit. You know? I don't know whether there's something special of being an Irish and a Jesuit. And if you're familiar with Celtic spirituality, probably we can ask Father Patrick about this Celtic. I don't know. I'll try to reflect later on. He has been teaching political philosophy at Hitrup College, University of London since 2002, and having formerly worked at the Milton Institute of Theology and Philosophy in Dublin. Currently, he is a fellow for political philosophy and Catholic social thought at Campion Hall, Oxford. His current research interests are religion and public life, the philosophy of justice, and the common good. His latest book, Global Ethics, Global Common Goods, and the Philippine Common Goods, among others. Other publications include a grammar of the common goods. If you want to ask questions and more questions about the common good, we could engage Father Patrick Jordan. He also some write-up on philosophical perspectives on people power. He has also published articles on human dignity, natural law, business ethics, and just war theory in the context of terrorism. And on a personal note, Father Patrick Jordan is such a very approachable person. Father Patrick, welcome again to Untitled Chapter University. Welcome to Davao and welcome to the Philippines.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be back.
How's your stay so far?
Very enjoyable. The weather is not too hot and it's not too wet. And the Jesuit community here and the university provide very hospitable environment.
Yes,
so
and a
it's
very
very
warm,
enjoyable. Very,
yes, warm welcome with the warm conversations. Okay.
Yes.
And since this is our first conversation, we dub this as Why Conversations Matter. Discovering the magic, hindi lang pala love, no? But discovering the magic, not just the love, the magic of love, Father. The magic and power of face-to-face conversation, especially in the world today where gradually the virtual conversation has become real. And we'd like to capture that we cannot replace the face-to-face conversation. So let's get the ball rolling, Father. So, Father, for you, what makes a good conversation?
Well, is there a difference between an interview and a conversation? I would think there is. A conversation has to be two-way. Whereas an interview, there's the interviewee and there's the interviewer, and the interviewer asks all the questions, and then the interviewee has to answer. So it's a bit one way, whereas a conversation is two-way. And again, in an interview, questions are asked to get the talk going, get the conversation going. But when we think about our own conversations, when we're chatting with a friend, with our parents, with our children, with our neighbors, we usually don't begin with questions. You begin by saying, "Oh, isn't the weather awful?" Well, of course, that's a question. But you're not expecting people to be giving you an argument about meteorology or climate change. You begin to chat about the things that affect everybody: the politics, the weather, the economy, the news. So conversations are very special. I'm picking up on this difference between conversation and interview because I think media, television, radio, conditions quite a bit what we expect to happen in conversation. We are shaped by not so much the conversations we experience with our friends and family and neighbors. We're shaped very much by what television and media and video and so on projects to us, and then we measure ourselves and our own performance against what we see there. So there's a first reaction to the question about conversation.
I'm very glad that you said it, Father, because we want to highlight that this is not an interview, and in fact, this is not just between you and me. We also have our companions here. A lot of them were from the Office of Social Formation. We have of course Ma'am Beth here, the director of the Rupee Office of Social Formation, and her glorious staff. Okay, so we would feel free anytime to raise your hand, raise a point, raise a question, or probably you want to push for an idea. Okay, so Father, because you started with the difference between conversation and an interview, you can also ask me questions, and I can also ask you questions. Okay? Okay. Father,
how do you think it's going so far?
Well, I think we're doing well.
We're doing okay. Oh, that's good. That's good.
We have you.
That's
okay,
good.
we want to really make this less formal. Father, I'm sure you've been through a lot of conversations. And is there, at some point in your life, Father, could you identify one or two life-changing conversation, and Father, and be able to tell us that story, and allow us to smell again that conversation, allow us to touch again that conversation, to see its color, so that it will be a very, as much as possible, making that past a reality again. What is that what was that life-changing conversation you had?
Gosh, it's not easy to just like that recall such conversations. But even if I did, I wonder if I would want to share them.
You're protected with the right against self-incrimination.
I plead the fifth. No, yeah, that's partly. I mean, I remember one conversation, and of course, as a priest, I had many such conversations where you discover a communality, you discover in the life of another person that God has been working in their life, or in their lives if it's a group, if it's a couple, to discover that God has been working in other people's lives. It's not just in my life I've experienced God touching me, calling me, inviting me to be a Jesuit, a priest. But then you discover there's similar parallel in their own experience. And with one particular couple who are really, really dear friends now, it was a moment when, at the end of the conversation, I said, "Did not our hearts burn within us?" That line from Luke's Gospel, where the disciples on the road to Emmaus have had this experience of meeting the stranger, and then they discover later the stranger is Jesus, and they turn to one another and say, "Did not our hearts burn within us?" And that's definitely the kind of experience that I imagine you're inviting me to reflect on. And I can say, yeah, I can pick out a number of moments like that where there were such encounters. I think there are moments in friendships when people become a little bit more intimate, when I have been a little bit more open, and we've discovered each other's stories and interests, and willingness to make something of our relationship, then that you do say something like that. Whatever about those words, "Did not our hearts burn within us?" But you say something like, "We could be friends. Wouldn't it be great to meet again, or wouldn't we do something together?" That sort of thing. Yeah.
Father, you mentioned about having a conversation with a friend, and oftentimes, Father, when we see a foreigner, and sometimes we are a bit intimidated. But now you visited Ateneo Davao several times, and how's the conversation going since the first time you came here in Davao? And it was also our first time to really have it. To be honest with you, when Father Joel informed me that you will be coming here and you'll be sharing and giving some lectures, at first I was really a bit intimidated, because who is this Father Patrick Riordan? And there's also a singer, there's a singer whose family name is also Riordan, but it's not Patrick.
Dolores Riordan, is it?
I'm not so sure, Father. Probably in Ireland, there's Dolores.
Right.
But being with you, for a couple of times, talking to you more and more, I don't just see you really as a colleague, but also as a friend. How's that conversation also with Filipinos and with people from Ateneo Davao has changed with your several visits with Father?
Well, my visits to Davao, of course, are in the context of my friendship with Father Joel, because we were together in doctoral studies in Europe, in Munich and in Innsbruck, and we got to know one another and developed a friendship back then, 1979 to whatever, 83. And so it's in the context of my friendship with Father Joel that I have been able to visit Davao, and that's a conversation between us that has gone on since then. I've visited Manila and Naga, and now 4 times in Davao. And for me, it's a great privilege to get the opportunity of discovering the Philippines and its rich complexity, because Manila is not Mindanao, and Naga is not Manila. And the great variety that there is, and the great range of experiences, the different histories, and language, of course, goes with that. So it's been a great opportunity for me to learn and discover this other world, or set of worlds, really. And then to find that I have an opportunity of entering into conversation and contributing something from my own qualification or my own specialization on the common good and political philosophy, and to have found that that's been well received. I was here for almost a year in 2001, and that was the time of the impeachment trial of Estrada, and there was second people power, and it was a very turbulent time. There was already then a cha-cha discussion going on, a charter change proposal, as there had been on a previous visit when I was visiting Manila, and Ramos was the president then, and again there was a charter change proposal on the table. So it was interesting to see that I could say things out of our experience in West, Ireland, Britain, about, say, parliamentary systems, about the difference between a parliamentary system and a presidential system, about the costs and the dangers, and also the advantages of either system. So to be able to contribute out of my specialization has been a great privilege. And Father Joel, of course, has given me the opportunity to do that, also by getting nice people like you to help me and set up the arrangement.
Yeah, Father, you talk about the friendship with Father Joel, and and conversation is very important in a friendly relationship. And I'm sure, Father, that when you speak of conversation, it doesn't mean that we really have to agree with one another, right?
No.
And you may answer this, you may or you may not answer this question. Now, Father Joel is a friend, and Father Joel is an intellectual giant. You're also an intellectual giant. Other points also, Father, that you also disagree, with one another, because we're also interested to know that. He has invited you, and usually people think that Father Joel invites people whom he agrees with, but that's not always the case. No, in fact, in the university, we do a lot of conversations, and we invite even those people who do not agree with us. On a personal level, Father, were there moments also in your studies in Europe, or that you disagree, not necessarily in terms of personal qualities, but in terms of idea or opinion on certain matters? With Father Joel.
Well, his doctoral studies was, he wrote on Karl Marx, and I've had the opportunity of teaching Marx and Marxism, but I'm not an expert. And so when I'd shown him some of my writings or some of my notes, he was able to correct me and show me where I could be a little bit more precise. And that's at the level of the sharing of ideas, where you can see others have different experiences or a different competence, and they're able to contribute. But for the most part, we've been very blessed as Jesuit confrere that we've been able to collaborate on the basis not only of a good personal friendship, but also of shared understanding of the realities that we deal with.
Yeah, Father, before Father, there's no social media. You communicate in terms of persons to persons, and probably there's a telephone. But could you sense now, Father, the impact of this virtual form of conversations? Some people communicate through text, people communicate through the social media, messenger. Could you spot, at least in your sensing, it's a major impact to the relationship, to the building up or probably weakening of a relationship with these virtual conversations compared with face-to-face conversation?
I really am out of my depth on that because I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Twitter.
So you are really a good example of face-to-face conversation.
Well, yes, or also of silence and of withdrawal. Protecting my own space, protecting my own peace of mind. And even when I do have a mobile phone, I'm quite happy to get texts, but I turn off the phone quite a lot.
But what is the difference between a good conversation and a meaningful conversation? In your opinion?
Yes. Conversations I situate in the context of relationships. So a relationship is an ongoing conversation. Just as I would say a political community is to be understood as an ongoing conversation. And any moment in the conversation can be fraught. There are situations in my life, in my experience, where even with very close friends, we've fought. You have to come along and say hard things in a gentle way, in a kind way, as best you can, for the other person to realize something of the reality that they may not be aware of, the effects of what they've said or what they've done. So, but that's just a moment in a relationship, and to be able to, it's interesting to see Pope Francis in that exhortation that he has about holiness, Gaudete et exultate. It's one of the things he picks out is the ability to enter into conflict, and that this is not in an aggressive way, or not in a way that's wanting to put another person down or to defeat them, but not to run away from the tensions that might be in a relationship or in a friendship, and to be able to address them. And courage is one of the points that he's picking out there that's essential for the relationship. Well, conversation, a conversation is always just a moment in a relationship, and the relationship to be seen perhaps as an ongoing series of conversations.
And probably, Father, we consider it's become really a meaningful. It's not just a sharing of words, but eventually it's a building up of relationship, Father. And probably we can ask our audience here, Father, because this is an ongoing conversation. Probably we can ask them, what is their, just very briefly, your idea of a good conversation, or probably, if not good, a meaningful conversation. Okay, Ma'am Sheila, would you like to share very briefly your idea of good or a meaningful conversation? And anyone would just like to throw an insight.
Okay, I resonated with Father earlier that when you converse, there's after a conversation, even during the conversation rather, there's a deepening of that sense of me being able to listen to that somebody in a deeper way, and that somebody also listens to me in a deeper way, and comes out of that experience like it's almost I say religious experience. There's a sense of goodness there. There's a sense of beauty that you bring along, and that meaningful conversation always leads you towards, for me, towards God. However, God is understood, or whatever description of God comes off of that conversation. So it's a meeting of the hearts and the minds, and therefore, like what he said, relationship can grow.
I think in the meeting of the mind, that is where the magic comes out, and the meeting of the heart. And we always say, oftentimes, heart speaks to heart. And I think that we have to capture. That's the whole point of this conversation, Father, to recapture that magic. And probably, I personally, I think it's a meaningful conversation. If it's going to be magical, but we are not saying, probably, Father, here that magical, that there will be you could hear the affirmations of angels and saints, but probably that the one that you said, Father, using the Emmaus experience, when our hearts are burning within us. And I think that is the magic, we capture again our passion, putting more life to the words being spoken. Jerry, for you as a student, as a student leader, what is for you a meaningful or a good conversation, or should we say a magical conversation?
Magical conversation for me, sir, is when you speak with people, you speak words that comes from the heart. Usually in Samahan Central Board, in our regular meetings, we don't just talk about work-related matters. We also talk about our personal lives, because it is important for us to conduct kamustahan, just simple kamustahan to check and to make sure na everyone is doing well in their spiritual life, in their personal na life, with their families and friends, and their academics as well. Not just Samahan Central Board related matters alone.
Yeah, Ma'am Agnes is smiling. Would you like to share some of your thoughts on meaningful or good conversation?
I was about to say that magic happens in a conversation if one is able to share oneself to the other, and the other also does that. It's kind of reciprocal, and that's when magic happens.
Yes.
Because that's love.
You've got to believe in magic. Okay.
But I have a question for Father.
Sure.
Because I was just wondering, Father, you said earlier that earlier you distinguished interview from that of a conversation by saying that one, the interviewer asks questions, and the other, the interview is answering the question or the questions. But then, can you also say that questions are important in conversations?
Oh yes. I think you see the distinction I've made. because I would say a relationship is the essential thing in conversation. There's a relationship already there, whereas the interviewer, you know, in the press, they come to interview, they have their badge that says I'm from the New York Times or whatever, I'm from the Philippine Inquirer, okay, and then that's the relationship in the interview. You know, this is the professional journalist who's asking the question and you respond. But it's the distinct types of relationships that matter. And I don't know if you know that American poet E.E. Cummings. He's got this quirky way of writing, you know, never uses capital letters and no full sentences, but it's very clever poetry, because sometimes the shape of the poem is also part of what he's communicating. But he has a beautiful line that I often remember. Love's function is to fabricate unknownness. So, not knowing, unknownness. So when there's a relationship that is respectful of the reality of the other person, that's a relationship whereby I'm always discovering the mystery of the other person. Mystery in the sense of, there are things I don't know. I can't assume to know already about this other person. And of course, when I encounter the other in that sense as still unknown, of course then there are questions. Then I do want to know. But of course, it's a delicate matter. You also don't want to destroy that sense of mystery, the mysteriousness of the other, and yet to grow in understanding and in knowing the other. In relationship where there's conversation, questions of course have their place. You know, but it has to be backwards and forwards. It's a reciprocity rather than just a one-sided.
Yeah, and I think, Father, it's going to be really impossible to get to know the entire person fully in the conversation, even we ask questions now.
Yeah.
And I think that leads to a certain dynamism in that magical conversation, because I cannot fully you well, and so we keep the conversation going. Okay. Can some of you share a magical, whatever that means, a magical conversation very quickly in your personal life? How is that changing your perspective? Sometimes talking to a student, revealing a story would change our perspective, or sometimes we just hear a word that triggers us, and we said, "Oh, my heart is being triggered," or our hearts are burning within us. Neil, would you like to share? This is a conversation. Okay, feel free. Feel free to. Okay, Neil, very quickly, imagine your experience of magical conversation.
We've just had prelims now. The students know this, and one way of having prelim exams for me is oral examinations. And I had this student, of course, so I'm a teacher. Someone answers and I give the question, so there's a professional relationship going on there. But suddenly she spoke about her passion in life. And she said, "I'm a composer." And just like that, I asked her to sing a song with her own song and playing the guitar. And while she was singing the song, the lyrics kind of really touched me. And
what is that lyric?
It was about hope. She was talking about hope, and it was a song that is a consoling song. It is a comforting song while she was going through a lot of difficulties and trials. And while she was singing that, it's as if the lyrics resonated really with what I'm going through as well. And so I realized, looking at hindsight, that it was beyond the exams, what was happening there at that moment. So for me, that is an example of a magical. And when you go beyond the professional, the formal, and you realize that there's something more. Yeah.
That's why I think we really like the image that is used by Father Patrick Jordan in terms of the immersive experience, that they were just surprised, and in a conversation we don't. I think a casual conversation and not contrived and scripted conversation, would bring really something that element of surprise, and that is magical. Sometimes as a teacher, Father, we have some plans, because we have to look at our lesson plans, and then But in that actual teaching experience, there are moments of surprises,
Yes.
and sometimes it's moving away from what's prepared. But we can say that it wasn't a magical conversation or a magical discussion. Okay, Father, in what way also, Father, that a conversation can be limiting? Of course, we affirm the importance of conversation, but I'm sure in our experiences, there are also moments that conversations can be limiting in terms of limiting the perspective of the other. And of course, also in terms of other side of it. And it can also be not just limiting, but it can also widen one's perspective.
Yeah. I think that the issue here is limits. You know, the limits that are broken open, and then the limits that can be constraining. And I think the contribution there about the professional situation where there's a teacher and the student, and the magic of the discovery of the more that goes beyond that. But there are situations where the actual professional context in which the conversation is taking place does impose certain restrictions. And this is something I encounter again and again, say in dialogue with lawyers, for instance. I'm a political philosopher, and I'm, as a philosopher, interested in the law and interested in how the law serves or doesn't serve the common good. But lawyers tend to avoid philosophical questions as much as possible. They want to concentrate on the law as it is and how it might be interpreted, how it might be made as well. So there's a situation where, depending on how the conversation has been framed, the perspective of the lawyers comes to dominate. Or if we frame the conversation originally in a philosophical way or a social scientific way, then we're able to break out of those limits and say to the lawyers, no, we're not going to be discussing this on your terms. It has to go beyond that into the bigger picture of the philosophical. And of course, this is a tension then that you encountered again and again as someone of faith, as a believer, a Christian, a priest in my case, where you're sensitive to the way actually God is working in the world. You're sensitive to this, and you can see goodness in situations and in people and in what they're doing and what they're saying, but they don't name it in a religious way. They don't say, this is me responding to the great creator God, or this is me responding to the love of Christ, or whatever. They talk about it in their own terms. And you, as the believer, I as the believer, want to say, but this is God at work, and this is the Spirit of God inspiring people, and the love that Jesus shows us is being realized here too, even though you don't know it, but it's not permissible to say it. There's a limit there that says, no, it's not appropriate in this context. Where I'm operating, say, as a political philosopher or as a scientist, I can't then introduce this other level of discourse because the limits are appropriately set on the conversation. But once you see a single conversation as just a moment in an ongoing history of conversations, then that's okay, because the opportunity may present itself again to explode those limits and to get beyond the constraints.
Yeah. Father, you're a lecturer, and is there a point? Was there a point in your life that and you lecture on different topics, right? And of course, in those lectures, there are always what we call conversations, question and answer portion. Have you ever encountered a hard-headed panel of reactor that really insisted that his idea of a particular issue is better than you, and he's telling you you're wrong and I'm right? How did you have that experience, and how did you deal with it?
I always win. No, you're quite right. Well, for the most part, I mean, as a student, there were times when I was subjected to ridicule and mockery and that kind of thing because I was embracing a religious perspective. But that's history, that's way back. But as a philosopher, I have had disagreements with colleagues in a public debate or in a public discussion where people don't see it my way. And then the question always is, how do we move this situation along? I mean, what can I possibly say now that will help this person to begin to doubt their own certainty? What can I possibly say? And shouting at them or just telling them they're wrong or asserting that I'm right isn't going to help them to move along. And that's the challenge, is to try and find some way of reformulating the question or representing my perspective that might sow a seed in them. Because this is the way it works for me. I find questions come after I give a paper or a presentation, and I spontaneously try and defend my position. But afterwards, when I'm reflecting back on it, when I look at my notes and I see, what was that person on about? What were they saying to me? Then I begin to realize, hey, I haven't covered everything here. There is a gap. There's something I need to learn. There's something I have to adapt to. So this is the way it has worked for me, that I have I've had to react after the fact. And this is again the point that I've been making about conversation, that it's in a long, a history of a relationship, that any particular conversation takes place. And even though I've learned from the contribution of the colleague in one discussion, that colleague may never afterwards discover what I have learned from them, but other colleagues will discover it without names being named necessarily, because I don't always remember who it was that had taught me X, Y, and Z. Yes.
Yeah. Father, how important is humility? And people would always begin from a moral high ground, that I am correct, and the other one who doesn't really agree with me or having a less valuable position. Probably I'd like to ask our guests here, our audience here, the importance of humility, in making a magical and in creating a magical conversation. Father, in Filipino we have this expression, ang sarap mong kausap, meaning you're nice to talk to converse with, and then so. And taking the importance of humility, probably I'd like to ask Ma'am Beth, what do you think is the importance of humility in creating a good, meaningful, and hopefully a magical conversation? Very briefly, for some of us. Ma'am Beth.
Yeah, good morning to everyone. I like the question. Thank you for reserving that to later for me. I learned humility very early in life. And as far as I remember how humility was taught to me, humility is truth. So for me, all conversations for me must be based on humility. Because there will never be because conversation, as we said, is a dialogue among two or more individuals stemming from the heart. Now, to make it meaningful for me is that for us to touch each other, then we have to start with being truthful. Not even start, but be truthful all the way. So allow me to say this, like my person, my husband would tell me, sometimes your sincerity and your humility really cannot be taken well by others, because you can be very direct. So
Ma'am, you can be very truthful.
Yeah,
yes.
Very truthful. Like in a recent conversation, I was told that, Ma'am Beth, I really appreciate your brute honesty, because of, like I just said, it's so simple. If you're partial, then be partial. If you're neutral, then be neutral. No, let's just name the spade and not hide over a lot of, let's say, good values, say like to be courteous and that, but being courteous and polite should also be based in truth. So for me, every single conversation must be based on truthfulness, and that's humility and allowing the other also with he or her to express his or her own truth as you express your own truth.
I think, Father, that's a very good point, Father. No, not just humility, but also coupled with truthfulness. It's just like saying, what do you want to hear? You want me to give you a comfortable lie or an uncomfortable truth? Would you like to comment on that? But that's a very good point now, that every conversation can be magical with humility, but not just humility. You can have a lot of pretenses, but also in the perspective of, or coming from that perspective of truth.
Yes, that was the word also came to my mind, so I'm delighted that that's the way you presented your answer on humility. There's an Irish poet, now dead, Patrick Kavanagh, and you may have come across him. He has a sort of a ballad, and it's about a figure in Dublin, and there's a refrain in this ballad: he was a queer one, I tell you, he was a queer one, I tell you. If you ever go to Dublin town, you'll discover this man. He was a queer one, I tell you. And a line in this poem is, he had the ability of making men feel as small as they really were, which was as great as God had made them. Which is a beautiful line. You know, it's this truth of us in terms of humility. We are, of course, insignificant in terms of the Creator God, but it's the reality of us is that each human being is called into relationship with the great God through Jesus and so on. And so it's this tension between our smallness and insignificance and the enormity of our vocation, of that which we are destined to be through the grace of God. So that the truth of myself that I bring to a conversation is also the truth of my ignorance.
Yes.
You know, I don't know. You know, there are some things that I can talk about and I can get away with, you know, as long as I'm not questioned too thoroughly. But there are lots of things that I'm ignorant of, I just don't know. And one of the things you learn as a professional is to know those limits, to be able to identify them, and not to pretend. This is important in particular for science. You know, when you've done an experiment, you conducted some kind of a project and you have its results, the results tend to be formulated in a very, very limited way. You know, we have confirmed a hypothesis in this case, on this occasion, in these ways. You know, you don't have the possibility of generalizing out of the particular, because that's a false conclusion. So the humility of, philosophers call it the canon of parsimony. You know, admitting the limitations of what it is you have learned or discovered. So no matter how much we've learned and discovered, it's always very limited, and the truth is about our own ignorance. And yet, that acknowledgement of the limit and of the smallness of our achievement is alongside the fact that our desire to know, our hunger for meaning, is unlimited, because its object ultimately is God, is the Creator. So that's the tension that's there.
In the university, Father, we're currently promoting the multi and interdisciplinary approaches to our subject, and I remember I had a very brief conversation with Father Joel. He approached the need for multi or interdisciplinarity in terms of conversations among these disciplines, not from a very technical way. You know, to be honest, I was really at first I was very critical with this multi-interdisciplinarity. But when Father Joel told me, not in a very technical way, he said, why we need to converse with other disciplines, Lunar, because you know, you can be an expert in one particular field, and you know very well that that particular field is limited, no, in dealing with a particular problem, and therefore the need to converse and engage with other discipline in order to address a particular concern is necessary. That I think none of us, even though you're having a doctorate on a particular degree, that there is sufficient in answering the concerns or the issues faced by the people of God or a particular nation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's a challenge also of Pope Francis, no, to keep on conversing. Kuya Paul, I forget.
John
Moore.
John Moore. Would you like to share your thoughts on magical conversation, or probably the role of humility, and not just humility, not false humility, no, but truth and humility? That's a good point, Ma'am Beth, kanina. In terms of contributing to a magical conversation.
Maybe in a conversation where you will find it magic, humility and truth is really essential, because when you have your own stance, some people tend to go and protect their own stance, and then some people might tend to not hear the stance of other people. Well, in the basis of humility and truth, you also have in the sense of humility, you have to also hear the truth of other people for you to be able to converse with them, and then to find a common ground, to find that common ground that you can agree upon, and then to maybe shall I say that common ground that you can expound on and then agree upon, and then find that differences also for you to be able to reconcile with or compromise with, or shall I say respect those differences.
Thank you, Kuya Janmar. Kuya, before we go to Ma'am Sheila, Kuya Jester, any sharing on
Kuya.
Siguro if I'm going to relate
Magical
this to my classroom experience with my students, I think it's always a defining moment for me as a teacher. Whenever my students would give me that moment of, I do not know. Or when my students would ask me questions that I can't give answers right away, or even questions that would even challenge how I see things. Sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes it's a struggle for me to admit to my students that sorry, I can't give you the right answer now. But I think it's always a defining moment for me as a teacher to say to my students that honestly, I do not know this. And sometimes it's even I find now that humility to ask, help me also in finding answer to this question. And whenever I say that to my students, it creates a different space now inside the classroom where conversation and discussion happens in an exchange, not in a one-way teacher-student highway only, but it's more now of an exchange of thoughts from a student's perspective, from a teacher's perspective, and it creates now an environment wherein you are, both of you, the students and the teacher, are pushed to know more, to research, and to further that idea.
In the age of social media, Father, no, and where people are becoming hypersensitive and very noisy, sometimes the problem lies not so much more on not knowing, but the problem lies on people tend to know a lot of things, no. But I don't know in terms of depth, no. Everything, people are becoming hypersensitive, and they want to say to even to a trivial matter, no, to feelings of people and to the concerns of people. Okay, Ma'am Sheila, you were
I was
you were raising your hand.
listening to the beautiful insights, no. It just comes to my mind that particular beautiful practice of the Jewish rabbis when they study like the Torah or a particular portion of the Torah, and they have what they call the 49-49 conversation. For example, in particular interpretation, so each of them would have this particular little truth, the truth, so that humility to recognize that each one has small t. That's the truth. But no one will have the entire truth. So they what you call reserve the 50. It's a very good number. It's called the truth, the whole, the absolute. It's 50. They reserve it for God. So that humility, that I do not know everything, and that to be able to be enriched to enrich this truth that I have, then I have to listen to other truths. And sometimes they also do this. Okay, let me argue on the basis on his truth. I don't like his truth. I mean, I don't agree with that. But maybe for a few moments or something like that, no? I will take your stance, which I do not agree, and debate on that, argue on that basis. And in that way, I'm more enriched. Go out of that particular discussion and, more enriched. Maybe I will still not hold, I will still be standing on my truth, but that truth now is so much bigger than when we first started talking. So the sense of tension, to live with the tension of, yes, I don't know, ignorance, no? But also to the absolute truth that's God, but you're right here. And so the humility to say, well, I have to be open. Okay? And so that's why in conversations, even with political enemy, like that, I had this experience yesterday. There was this rally. Okay, again, bro, against Ontario. So they were just talking. I was just there, standing, and then was just listening. And just listening. I just listening to their points. And afterwards, I go, they have a point. But their anger sometimes, stop them from really opening their minds up. But you see, they have this particular pain that I could not even grasp, but I know they're pained. So listening, so much part of conversation, and being humble is maybe to, before somebody else's truth, I maybe for a while bow down a little bit and listen a bit.
Would you like to give some of your thoughts on their little sharings, Father? Or would you like to reserve it in your concluding statement? Or would you like to comment? Would you like to comment?
How far away are we from a concluding statement? We're not there by a long shot. Listening is key to good conversation as well, isn't it? That point is well taken. And again, there are different levels of conversation because there are different relationships.
Right.
And there are the professional contexts, and then there's the political context. The political context that can be dominated by slogan. The pithy soundbite, the short slogan that unfortunately relies on very strong, conclusive language, but doesn't admit any question or any doubt or any openness. And this, if I might just sidetrack for a moment, the language of human rights, the language of rights, is a very valuable language, but it is a very inadequate language for dealing with political problems. Because the language of rights is fundamentally conclusive. It expresses conclusions. But very often we are in situations where we're not yet at a conclusion. And if you formulate issues, for instance, the right to property and the right to nourishment. Okay, so if the hunger and deprivation of so many people, there are those who have so much and they have rights to their property, and there are those who are hungry and starving and they have rights to food. So to be able to assert two rights doesn't get us further along the question, what are we going to do about this? What ought we to do about it? What can we require of others to do about it? So the language of rights is also, while very valuable, very useful, very precious for what it can achieve, it's also very dangerous for conducting political conversation, because it can end up at that level of sloganeering. And the soundbite sort of culture the slogan culture that can dominate political discourse is really frustrating for someone who says, as I do, the key to understanding politics is to see politics as a very distinctive form of rule, a very distinctive form of organizing life and society. Because instead of relying on coercion, instead of relying on force to make people comply and conform, we rely on persuasion. We rely on argument. We try and present reasons and explain why it is one path or one proposal is defensible, is justifiable. And when we attempt to do that, we are opening ourselves up to challenge, because maybe there are questions about justification we haven't answered. Maybe there are implications of what we are proposing that will harm the interests of others that we haven't considered. And so when we're justifying our proposals politically, we are trying to enter into a conversation. But politics, as a way of managing our conflict, is a way that relies on talk, on argument, on persuasion, on conversation. And that's one of the things, while I'm on a rant, I may as well keep going.
Yeah, that's a good point though, about the concept of human rights. It's a concept that is not complete.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that would be another separate topic, no? And
Yes.
I remember, Father, we're listening to the third song of Mio Duterte yesterday, and he was talking about addressing the human rights now. You're concerned with human rights, but I'm concerned with human lives. I think and he's a politician. He's a politician, and I think his words need a lot of unpacking, no? And a lot of, we have to be critical about it and to study about it. And I think what you've just really just said a while ago relative to this issue warrants another conversation. Father, we're slowly wrapping up. Father, to what extent this magical conversation, meaningful conversation, good conversation can promote the common good? Because you're a man expert on common good, and when I say expert, we don't mean to say that you make conclusions. Yeah.
Well, sometimes I do. But I want to pick up on your word promote. You see, because the experience of conversation is the experience of having already a good in common. In fact, several goods in common. Okay? The fact that we are in conversation makes us aware that we share already, without having to create it, we share already much that is common. Somebody was mentioning earlier the point about common ground. One of the things we already have in common as a basis for conversation is language. That is a good in common,
Right.
the fact that we share a language. And when, as I come as a foreigner into a situation where I cannot speak Cebuano, I do not understand some of the local languages, I used to be able to say Mass in Tagalog, that was Singalan ng Amad, mga ng
But you've understood.
Sumainyo ang Panginoon. But that was very limited mastery of the
But
language. But having a language in common is such a common good. Now, beyond the language, there's the expectations that people bring to a conversation. I'm not going to impose my will on you. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to be attentive to what you have to say. That meaning that we share about what we can expect from the encounter is a good in common. But then we might end up talking about, for instance, a political philosophical point, or we might talk about climate change, we might talk about politics or the economy. Then we're focusing on a good out there that we are trying to understand and contribute to and maybe build and construct, in that sense, promote. Also because that's going to be part of a bigger set of goods in common. But the point I always want to draw people's attention to is attend to the goods in common that are there already. Common good is not just something in the future or something out there, it's there already. And without goods in common, we wouldn't have humanity, we wouldn't have society,
Right.
we wouldn't have a relationship. So that's the key to the political philosophical stance approach that I take, which is not to get people thinking about the common good as some project in the future beyond us. It's about building on the goods that are there already.
Thank you. And language is good and at the same time common to all of us. Okay. We're slowly wrapping up. Hearing from the sharing of one another, I'd like to ask very briefly, perhaps a one line or an insight brought about by this magical, good, and meaningful conversation. Let's begin with you, Jerry, and before we give my last, more or less, question for Father Pat. Jerry, any insights or sharing or questions brought about by this face-to-face, hopefully magical, good, and meaningful conversation?
Sure. Honestly speaking, I love how the conversation is going. Supposed to be. I'm an intern here at ICOM, and I'm really happy to really witness and join the conversation because true enough that meaningful conversations should be. I mean, it should be that we should practice meaningful conversations inside our workplace, inside the classrooms, even in our organization, in Samahan Central Board, to be specific. I really love it when we just talk about our passion for God, for example, our passion and the love that we have for our God and how it keeps us going every day. How it motivates us in everything that we do. And I would like to emphasize to all the students who are watching that most especially to those millennials, yes, hypersensitivity nowadays, most especially in social media, is very visible. It's very prevalent. And one thing that I can advise to everyone is in every conversation and in every discussion, intellectual discussion that we are into, let us keep in mind to put humility, to put the truth at the center of everything. Because agree to disagree and find find your commonality, find the things that you can agree upon, and those differences that will help your conversations going. And
that's one of the longest one-liners.
Sorry, I was afraid to share a while ago because
your hearts are burning to share that. So it's okay. Thank you, Jerry.
Well, for me, I share Jerry's gratefulness, and I'm also humbled by this experience of having this kind of conversation. What really struck me is the one that Father pointed out earlier, that we don't have to look forward to what we can, like the common good thing, but like it's here already, and then find ways where we can work together. And I guess having conversations is really important in our lives as we continue to really work for God's kingdom here on earth, and then of course reach out to those who are in need in terms of those people who are not only that we find vulnerable and in the peripheries, but people who are just beside us. Because sometimes we tend to forget that there are just people right there beside us, needing for a magical conversation to happen.
Thank you, man.
One realization I have is that whenever you're conversing with other people, may it be your tricycle driver or may it be your boss, maybe it's good to have it's good to add to humility and truth the value of love, because from love stems understanding, compassion, understanding that other person when it comes to their truth, and then respecting your differences.
Thank you, Kuya. Another Kuya.
What makes meaningful conversations, meaningful and magical conversations is that we see it in the context of a relationship and in what we have discussed, in an ongoing relationship. That's it.
You are really into relationships. May your relationship be magical as you face the altar in the coming years.
Yes, thank you very much, Father, for that candidness, that openness. This was very important in a conversation, and just being who you are. And we were inspired also to continue the conversation, because not to converse is not to relate. Right? So let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you, ma'am. Kuya Jess.
I think they've said enough. I mean, but I'm just hopeful for another set or another episode of this coffee circle conversation, and I think this is a very good chance, a very good avenue for everyone to share, even their most candid and even their little truth to add in the bigger truth in this exchange of conversation.
Yeah. Ma'am Beth, as the director of the Arupi Office of Social Formation, probably you could also give your brief, let's say, in a program, your remarks. I wouldn't use any more concluding remarks, but your probably grateful remarks for the fruit of this conversation.
Yes, thank you for that opportunity, Lunar. First and foremost, I share the gratitude of the whole group that is here today for this opportunity to converse and to know more, the meaning of conversations. So I'd like to especially thank Father Riordan for being with us and to share his wisdom, and to be so humble enough to share what is underneath that philosopher in him, but the underneath that I've sensed is a kindred soul, a kindred spirit, and it's so refreshing and so assuring to be in conversation with you. I'd like to also thank Father Joel for this opportunity, for bringing you over, and this platform of conversation, of which I think his initiative of bring together people to the platform of Pakikinabi. Now, the Arupe Office of Social Formation is introducing such a platform, coffee circle conversation. This effort to bring people together to converse, I believe and I am very grateful that we are living out really Ignatian spirituality, wherein we are taught to really discern, and in conversations such as this, as a common that we are brought together by our spirituality, or even those who are not into our spirituality, as what you have mentioned a while ago, humanity, in trusting in the goodness of humanity, where we are given this platform to really, share our thoughts and our hearts into this conversation. So I'm very grateful. But maybe to say more about like what you have asked a while ago, a one-liner, but though it's really difficult to have a one-liner here. It's such a rich conversation such as this. But if we are to premise what conversation is, then every conversation, with what we have discussed, then every conversation is truly meaningful. I'd like just to put forward in digital age such as ours. I'm very relieved that I share with Father Riordan, because my Twitter is it's still an egg. It never been a bird. It never flew. It's so difficult for me to really get into social media to Father, and yes, I really value space. But in this digital age where people are into social media, face-to-face conversation is sometimes you just don't need words. You just look to each other's eyes and you already feel what the other is trying to tell you. You are able to just touch and look and sense, and the conversation has already been done.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
So the beauty and the magic of face-to-face conversation.
And the one just spoken, speaking from a heart of a wife and of a mother, no? And I think it's very real in husband and wife relationship when they just look at each other. May pera pa ba tayo? Mahal mo pa ba ako? Thank you, Ma'am Beth, for very insightful remarks, no, not concluding remarks. Father, would you like to give an an inspiration, a message, especially to those people, young and old, millennial and not so millennial, digital migrants, digital natives. In the advent of social media, where virtual conversation has become real, what is your message to them to capture this good, meaningful, and magical conversation? The value of that face-to-face conversation.
Wow.
Or whatever you want to say.
He's a very demanding boss. It's not like you give easy tasks. But I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is, reading John's Gospel, God reveals God's self as Word. The Word spoken into history, the Word made flesh. And so we refer to the Son of God as the Word. And it seems to me this ought to make words very precious for us. All words. And of course conversations, where they can be silent and look and gesture, that's always already in the context of a relationship where many words have been spoken. Not least, I do, I will. So because God reveals God's self as Word, I think all words have to be precious. And that's why, as teachers, we train our students to be careful and precise in their use of words, not to be casual, but to be attentive and careful. And, I think when it comes to what we say to one another, what we communicate, yes, the other person is precious to me, but what I say must also be precious to me, and what they say to me must be precious. So I think that spirituality of the Word is something to nourish and encourage, because flowing from that then will be a reluctance to be relying only on slogan, only on the shortened message that can be so misunderstood, that can be so hurtful. People are talking about hypersensitivity. We're aware of the kind of bullying that can happen with social media. So what will prevent that? It's not by wagging fingers or complaining and criticizing people. It's by saying to them, training them to be appreciative of the Word. And that's where I've quoted a couple of poets already. But that's where poetry can be such, and lyrics as well, can be such a source of sensitivity to the magic of the Word. So maybe I should finish then with Gerard Manley Hopkins. His poem that tells us, about the great variety of things, how God plays in 10,000 places. Lovely in eyes and lovely in limbs not his. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in eyes and lovely in limbs not his, to the Father, through the features of men's faces. So that sensitivity of the presence of the Word in everything, everywhere. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. You're not just an Irish Jesuit, you're not just a political philosopher, but you're also a poet. I sense that the Word has been exposed. The Word became flesh, and dwelt among us. And so, Coffee Circle Conversation just became flesh, and hopefully will continue to dwell among us for our contribution, our humble contribution to greater intellectual conversations, always for mission. Father Pat, we're very, very thankful to have you as our first guest here. And you're no longer a guest, no? You are really part of Untitled Chapter University. For the greater glory.
Yes.
Thank you also for our insightful audience. Can I ask you to come here just for the photo op, video op? Parang stay there.
Very necessary.
This is the 8th sacrament